tonight on Perspectives. Russia and the United States announce a ceasefire deal for southwestern Syria to keep foreign forces out, but Russia says that doesn't include Iran.
No one mentioned Iran or pro-Iran forces. If we talk about pro-Iran forces, someone might be tempted to call the entire Syrian army pro-Iran. And then what? Should it surrender?
As relations between Israel and diaspora Jewry reach crisis point, Israel's president tries to make peace within the family.
The state of Israel was and will always be the home of every Jew.
And in Germany, a self-styled radical attempt to redefine modern Jewish culture.
If you talk about Jews and Holocaust and I don't know what, you have to take them too. So it's reality.
Hello and welcome to Perspectives. I'm Eylon Levy, standing in for Tracy Alexander. In Syria, the bloody 6.5-year civil war is winding down and the victors are already dividing up the spoils. On Saturday, Assad's ally Russia reached a ceasefire agreement with the United States for southwestern Syria, calling for the reduction and ultimate elimination of foreign forces and foreign fighters from the area. But today, Russia says that does not mean Iran or Iranian-backed militias will be pulled out of Syria. This comes amid reports that Iran is establishing a permanent military base in Syria near the Israeli border, something Israel has said it won't allow. Senior American national security officials have arrived in Israel for high-level talks to discuss Iran creeping closer to Israel's border as Israel vows to continue operating in Syria, including in that ceasefire zone, for its own security. Here's Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov saying Iran retains a legitimate presence in Syria.
In the context of concrete decisions on how the zone will function and how we should organize it to avoid the repetition of armed clashes, yes, it is written there that the goal, both inside this zone and outside it, is to ensure departure of non-Syrian military units. No one mentioned Iran or pro-Iran forces. If we talk about pro-Iran forces, someone might be tempted to call the entire Syrian army pro-Iran. And then what? Should it surrender? In my opinion, it is wishful thinking.
To help break down this story, we're joined by our senior Middle East correspondent, Mohammed Al-Qasim. He joins us now live from Gaziantep, Turkey, on the border with Syria. Mohammed, we know now from a BBC report that Iran is establishing a permanent military base in Syria. What can you tell us about that effort and other Iranian attempts to establish Iran permanently as an actor in Syria?
Iranian presence and the Iranian proxies in Syria is not breaking news at this time. Iran has invested a lot to probe and back President Bashar al-Assad since the beginning of this Syrian conflict. Iran invested in blood, invested in military equipments and financial help to the Syrian regime, and that's why Iran is now trying to establish a foothold in Syria as close to the Israeli-Syrian borders as possible. This will create or make Iran even that more of a regional power, and also create a threat, direct threat to Israel. And Iran will not relinquish its control in Syria anytime soon or that easily. Iran has said repeatedly that its presence in Syria is there to stay.
Okay, Mohammed in Turkey, thank you very much. Do stay with us. We're going to be coming back to you in just a few minutes for Under the Radar. But coming right up, we take a look at how the United States and Russia are negotiating over the ceasefire in Syria. We'll be back with Mohammed Al-Qasim Under the Radar, and more new details emerging in the corruption probe surrounding Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Plus, Israeli President Reuven Rivlin tries to ease the divide between diaspora Jews and the Israeli leadership. We'll be back in just a few minutes. I'm Eylon Levy. You're watching Perspectives.
Stories. Stories that touch your heart and open your eyes. Stories that take you on a journey and show you something you will never forget. Look through the lens and see what others see. High definition, documentaries and discussions that connect us all. Join Lauren Izzo weeknights at 10:03 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I'm Emily Francis on I-24 News. Join us on Trending right here on the show that shines the light on the many amazing people doing positive work to inspire. This is the show about building bridges.
Weekdays at 8 a.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. In the cloud of war, it isn't always easy to see what's right in front of your eyes. And in the Middle East, the daily cannon fire of headlines can make us overlook some of the most important details, which are actually the key to understanding what's really going on. This is Under the Radar. Our senior Middle East correspondent Mohammed Al-Qasim is our man with his eyes and ears on the ground across the Middle East. He joins us now live from Gaziantep, Turkey, on the border with Syria. Mohammed, Syria's skies are somewhat protected by anti-aircraft systems, but what has slipped under the radar?
Well, let's talk about the meeting and the statement that took place last Saturday after a short meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. On the surface, they both seem to agree on what, how the conflict in Syria must end. They both said that it should be a political resolution, in Syria. However, if you hear two different high-ranking officials, one American, we're talking about John Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, and the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who came out today with some statements. You can tell that there is a huge gap between the two global powers on how to go about the Syrian conflict. Let's have a listen to what both had to say, and we'll get back and try to dissect their statements.
The enemy hasn't declared that they're done with the area yet, so we'll keep fighting as long as they want to fight. We're not just going to walk away right now before the Geneva process has traction.
Now, literally yesterday, I've heard the statement by Secretary of Defense Mattis that the United States will not leave Syria before they are sure that the political process moves in the right direction. And the right direction for the United States is the regime change, though they don't demand preliminary departure by Bashar al-Assad. All of this contradicts the Geneva agreements. It contradicts those reassurances by the leadership of the State Department that the only goal of the U.S. in Syria is to fight against terror.
And to enlarge it and to ensure that.
Eylon, it's evident from listening to James Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, as well as Sergei Lavrov, the Russian Foreign Minister, that the two sides don't agree on the specifics. Mattis said that the U.S. military presence in Syria must be there for a long time to try to stop a comeback by the so-called Islamic State organization. And also, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian Foreign Minister, said that Russia did not pledge or commit to push out the Iranian forces or its proxies. We're talking here about Hezbollah, and that the U.S. is probing and helping terrorist organizations or extremist organizations in Syria by not targeting them. So it's evident that both sides are still far apart from having a unified strategy of how to resolve the conflict in Syria.
Mohammed, disagreements between the two sides on how to deal with the future of Syria, but which great power's strategy on Syria seems to be winning at the moment?
At this moment, it looks like Russia has the upper hand. Since President Donald Trump took office last January, he seemed to have given Russia the reign or the control of how to go about getting the conflict in Syria subdued or how to end it. However, every once in a while we hear statements from the U.S. that they are still involved. But so far, Russia seems to be the winning party. The Syrian government has been gaining rapidly territory throughout the country, and the Iranian presence and the Iranian influence is expanding, as well as Hezbollah. And we see that the Syrian armed opposition and the opposition in general is very weak right now to even pose a serious, legitimate threat to the Syrian government. So at this point, if I had to guess, I think the Russian has the upper hand in Syria, and they have a much clearer strategy of how to go about the conflict in Syria.
Mohammed Al-Qasim, under the radar in Turkey, thank you very much. Well, for more on the situation in Syria, let's bring in Alexei Khlebnikov now from Moscow. He's a Middle East expert at the Russian International Affairs Council. Mr. Khlebnikov, thank you for joining us. On Sunday, Russia committed to a deal with the United States to reduce and ultimately eliminate the presence of foreign forces and foreign fighters in Syria. Now Russia turns around and says, wait a minute, that doesn't include Iran, it doesn't include Iranian-backed militias. Did Russia purposely mislead the United States? Was this necessary ambiguity to get a deal, or was something lost in translation?
Well, it might be both. But if you read attentively the released text, there is no mention about Iran or commitment of Moscow to make sure withdrawal of Iranian troops. So many experts many observers interpreted it as an agreement to remove those pro-Iranian Shia forces from Syria, which means actually that Moscow consented to make Tehran move its forces out of the country. But today, as you rightly mentioned, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov refuted such allegations, stating that Russia didn't promise any withdrawal of Iranian or pro-Iranian forces from Syria in that trilateral memorandum. He claimed that their presence is legitimate together with Russian forces, as opposed to the United States, as they were not invited by the Syrian government. He also, what is interestingly, he uncovered the substance of the negotiations behind that November 8 memorandum. So he said that Russia and the US actually did not discuss in details what's happening in broader Syria, rather focusing on concrete area of southwest Syria, on de-escalation zone there. So he said that what they discussed with Americans were mechanisms of how those de-escalation zones would be functioning in the
Mr. Khlebnikov, I mean, you're absolutely right to say that there were no specifics within the deal about which foreign fighters we're talking about. But I'm reading the text here, and it says, commitment to the reduction and ultimate elimination of foreign forces and foreign fighters from southwest Syria. Who do the Russian and American negotiating teams think they're talking about, if not Iran?
So what Lavrov actually referred during his press conference today is that it's not only Iranian forces, but all non-Syrian forces. And I believe that he refers to, and he actually named it, he referred to the foreign fighters which are allied with Syrian rebels, which are backed by the United States. And I believe that he meant those rebel forces which are in South Syria near Atanf city. Making that, actually saying that this withdrawal of non-Syrian forces is a two-way street. Not only Iranian forces should move out, but also American-backed. So basically, Russia implies that it might ensure withdrawal of Iranian and pro-Iranian forces just from southwest Syria, but only under conditions that Washington withdraws its own backed foreign militants from there.
Okay, well, there appears to be a misunderstanding between the sides over what the text precisely means, but we'll wait to see how the Americans respond, whether they regard the Russians as pulling a trick or that being a necessary ambiguity in the negotiations. Mr. Khlebnikov in Moscow, thank you very much for joining us here on Perspectives.
Yep.
Coming up, new details emerge in Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption probe. And Israeli President Reuven Rivlin tries to ease the divide between diaspora Jews and the Israeli leadership. Plus, RT, Russia's state-funded news station, is forced to register in the United States as a foreign agent. More after the break.
Israel, the Middle East, the world. Get your daily dose every morning on I-24 News. News from around the world to around the corner. Jeff Smith brings you the top stories, the hard news, and analysis you need to know. Weekday mornings at 7:05 a.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Strictly Security. Your weekly look into security, intelligence, and strategic affairs. Our team brings the latest on the major international conflicts. Analysis of the major security issues right here in the Middle East and around the globe. Join us for a close look at innovative military technology and get up to speed with what's happening in cyberspace. Saturdays, 8:05 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
What you need to know, the news, fast and to the point, and the in-depth interviews that will keep you in your seat from the people that you trust. I-24 News presents The New Rundown, co-hosted by Nurit Ben and Kalev Ben David, every Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Politics, economics, business, and technology. Get the real news and the real insight about what's happening around the world. Michelle McCory breaks down the top stories of the day from the Middle East to the U.S. Weeknights beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern.
Welcome back to Perspectives with me, Eylon Levy. We're taking a look at stories deep inside the Middle East. Well, Israel is concerned that the de-escalation zones negotiated between regional powers for Syria will heighten the risk of war, but they haven't exactly brought peace to Syria yet. The death toll has now risen to 61 from 3 air raids in the Syrian town of Atareb, west of Aleppo. Footage from the White Helmet Civil Defense Group shows smoke rising and people running to shelter. At least 29 people were killed from one airstrike on an open-air market in the town. The area is inside a de-escalation zone controlled by opposition rebels and al-Qaeda-affiliated jihadists. It's not clear whether those strikes were from Syrian or Russian jets. Moving to Israel, developments in the corruption investigation centered on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, dubbed Case 1000. Mr. Netanyahu and his wife Sarah are suspected of illicitly receiving gifts from billionaire benefactors, most notably tens of thousands of dollars worth of cigars and champagne from wealthy businessman, Israeli-born Hollywood producer Arnon Milchan. Witnesses have reportedly testified that the value of the gifts from 2 wealthy benefactors was so high that they decided to split the cost between them. But the testimony also claimed that those wealthy men never asked for anything in exchange for the gifts, even as those gifts became more demands than favors. Here's I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Mike Wangenheim.
Is a gift if you demand it? That definitely takes away the surprise factor. The latest word in the ongoing investigations of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is that he and his wife Sarah dictated to their billionaire friends when wine and cigars should be purchased on their behalf and delivered to Jerusalem. That testimony reportedly came from the aide to Netanyahu benefactor Arnon Milchan, the Hollywood producer and Israeli hero who is now suspected of trading gifts for favors, including the securing of a U.S. visa, the advancement of an Israeli infrastructure project, project that he had an interest in and the manipulation of the sale of an Israeli TV channel in which he has a large stake. Personal aide Hadass Klein reportedly told police earlier this year that Sarah Netanyahu demanded bottles of champagne from Milchan and Australian mogul James Packer. The prime minister would put in orders for cigars. Klein also reported harassment from the Netanyahus due to her refusal to send a building inspector affiliated with Milchan over to the prime minister's residence to look at a leak. Possibly the only thing Klein reportedly told police that would redeem the Netanyahus is that Milchan and Packer never asked for anything in return, thereby helping to refute the notion that the gifts were in exchange for something of value and of potential crime. Mike Wagenheim, I-24 News.
With the police investigation of the Prime Minister, Iran approaching the northern border, and Islamic Jihad plotting a revenge attack, tempers are as hot as ever in the Israeli parliament. For more on how decisions are made in Israel's legislature, here's a report I filed earlier.
Unparliamentary democracy.
If Israel has a distinctive political culture, this is it. Some parliaments have debates, Israel has shouting matches. Competition is the lifeblood of any healthy democracy, but sometimes Israel's politicians seem to be competing for who can dive deepest into the gutter. Take resident bad boy Oren Khazan calling a colleague too ugly to be a prostitute when she calls him a pimp. Coalition whip David Bitan and Miki Zohar heckling bereaved parents. Healthy democracies need passionate arguments. But in Israel, discussions get so heated that lawmakers are frequently dragged out of the hall by ushers. And that's only when they don't stage noisy walkouts first. It's normal for lawmakers to heckle their colleagues. Sometimes all hell breaks loose. When Arab lawmaker and resident provocateur Hanin Zouabi returned from trying to break the Gaza blockade, Anastasia Michaeli charged the podium to physically stop her talking. Years later, Zouabi was still daring colleagues to come and hit me. And who can forget the moment Anastasia Michaeli threw water in a colleague's face? What MKs have in passion, they match in creativity, like when Ilan Gilon shouted at far-right extremist Benzi Gopstein that he was the foreskin of the Jewish Ku Klux Klan. Yes, you heard that right. Sometimes the insults are more sophisticated. After the incident with a cup of water, MK Ahmed Tibi responded with a poem, ending with a play on words for your mother's, well, you get the point. And then the cheap gimmicks, such as Mayor Porush handcuffing himself to the podium, or Kadima MKs spraying air freshener in protest at what they called a smelly trick, or Ahmed Tibi again literally pouring cold water on a bill he opposed. In a democracy, elected representatives should reflect the people they serve, but they should also set an example, because when those who make the rules are unruly, civil society will only become, well, less civil. Some of Israel's leaders know this is a threat. Knesset Speaker Yuli Edelstein scolded MKs, saying their last session would hardly be remembered for its culture of debate or appropriate public behavior. Whether the right dishonorable members will listen, well, first they'll have to stop shouting. Moving further afield in the Middle East, the death toll has risen to 530 after the year's deadliest earthquake rocked the border between Iran and Iraq. The 7.3 magnitude earthquake could be felt as hundreds of miles away in Tehran and Baghdad. The earthquake hit 7 big cities and 1,950 villages in the area. Iranian state media said 12,000 houses were completely destroyed, a further 15,000 damaged. This was the deadliest earthquake in Iran since 2005. We're taking a short break now, but coming up, Israeli President Reuven Rivlin tries to ease the divide between diaspora Jews and Israeli leadership with a message of tough love for America's Jews. And more. Russia Today, Russia's state-funded news station, is forced to register in the United States as a foreign agent. Plus, we'll go to the Big Apple, where we take a look at Manhattan's only inner-city vineyard. We're going to take a very short break. You're watching Perspectives. Don't go away.
The trends, the fads, the breakthroughs. Get it all on Trending. From food, music, and art to advances in modern medicine. Meet the trendsetters and the tech giants who make it all happen on Trending with Emily Francis. Weekdays beginning at 8 a.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Unflinching, opinionated. Weeknights, David Schuster and Shayna Estulin bring you analysis, interviews, and opinions that connect us to the Middle East and the world. Watch Crossroads weeknights starting at 6 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. Relations between Israel and diaspora Jewry are at a low point as Israeli leaders take steps to undermine non-Orthodox streams of Judaism in Israel. In a bid to make peace, Israel's President Reuven Rivlin told the Jewish Federation's General Assembly in Los Angeles that Jews in America were Israel's full partners, but he urged them to respect Israel's democratic process, warning that religion and state might just be the most explosive political issue in Israel today.
The state of Israel was and will always be the home of every Jew. Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Secular, Traditional, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, we are all Jews. The Jews of the diaspora, especially in North America, are full partners, not only in the establishment of Israel, but also in its development. You are true stakeholders in the wonder called Israel. We thank you. We thank you for this sense of family, for your unconditional support and love, for your consistent message that we Jews stick together.
Here to dive into the details is our diplomatic correspondent Eli Hohenberg, and live from New York we're joined by Rabbi Joshua Stanton of East End Temple. Eli, break down for us, why are relations between the Israeli government and diaspora Jewry so strained today?
Well, I think it's safe to say that it all started in the modern age, of course, with the Netanyahu's campaign against the nuclear deal, which of course culminated in the infamous or famous, depends on how you look at things, a speech in the U.S. Congress. Now, without diving into whether he was right, wrong, whether he did the right thing or not, to a certain extent, by conducting this campaign against the policy of the American president, he somewhat forced, not only, obviously it was more evident among the Democrats, but also Republican Jews, he somewhat forced them to choose between their commitment to the state of Israel and their commitment to the United States. And this definitely was a turning point in the relations. Afterwards, of course, came the whole issue of the Western Wall, but that was, again, the major point where Israel's policy...
So even though diaspora Jews are talking about conversion crisis and Western Wall, you're saying really it drills down to the Prime Minister trying to manipulate that cleavage in America.
It started there. It started there. It, of course, gained momentum with other occurrences and events, but this was, again, a major turning point that put the American jury at a very uncomfortable position.
Okay, well, let's get some more details from Rabbi Joshua Stanton in New York. Rabbi Stanton, President Rivlin called on American Jewry to respect Israel's democratic process. He said, look, I know the Western Wall crisis is important for you, but respect, we're a democracy, and the issue of religion and state is perhaps the most explosive one here. What do you make of that call?
First of all, thank you so much for having me on the show.
A pleasure.
I think that the most important thing is that we stay in dialogue and conversation. My big fear is that this is a symptom that if we don't agree about everything, we can't talk about anything. I think that the Western Wall is such a potent symbol right now, and we need real dialogue around it. And we need the Israeli government to help convene conversations about religious pluralism. As a Reform rabbi, I want to feel like a full partner, and my fear is that sometimes I don't feel like a full partner, even though I care just as much about the Jewish people. Similarly, I'm worried that the conversion crisis has alienated many American Jews and made us feel somehow a distance between ourselves and our spiritual homeland. And I think that the Prime Minister, the Israeli government, has an opportunity to be conveners about important issues, not only for Israel, but for Jewry worldwide, and to have difficult and important conversations that affirm religious pluralism.
Okay, Rabbi Stanton, you're calling for dialogue with the Israeli government. I want to ask you, the Reform movement has said it won't meet Netanyahu until he makes a concrete offer for solving the Western wall crisis. Can I take from your call to dialogue that you are opposed to the Reform movement's call for an effective boycott of a dialogue with the Prime Minister until he makes that grand gesture?
I think that dialogue needs to come with expectations of concrete action. Talk without action is not meaningful. But I think that quiet conversation to move us forward and move the Prime Minister forward towards religious pluralism could at moments be helpful. I think the question is public dialogue versus private. And what I'm suggesting is that private, offline dialogue could be helpful, but public demonstrations of solidarity at this point are not possible.
Okay, Rabbi Stanton, you say that you, as American Jews, want to be full partners within Israel, and that's something that Israel's president said when he addressed that conference. Now, foreign Jews obviously can't vote in this country. Only Israelis can do that. But do you really expect American Jews to be full partners, or do they have to accept there is a democratic public here that votes for a democratically elected legislature, and at the end of the day, it's their voice that counts the most?
I think that we as American Jews embrace and love democracy. At the same time, we do have a stake in the state of Israel, and we want that stake affirmed. We want respect. We want to have a place to pray by the holiest site in our tradition. We don't want to have our beliefs questioned by the state of Israel. And we don't want to have conversions to Judaism, people who are of patrilineal descent, whose fathers are Jewish, to have their identities questioned. And so we need a certain set of basic premises fulfilled, a certain set of guidelines fulfilled in order to feel like we have a full stake in the state of Israel, like many of our partners in other denominations do.
Rabbi Stanton, I understand your anguish. I understand your anguish and your desire for Israel to feel really like a home for Jews abroad. But at the same time, the Israeli government comes along and says, look, we rely on support from ultra-Orthodox members of our government. And if we're going to push ahead with things that please people who aren't even citizens, we could cause a serious political and social crisis within Israel. Is that a serious expectation to place on the shoulders of the Israeli democracy?
What's right and what's expedient are different, and we're asking the Israeli government to do what's right and to affirm religious pluralism. As a Reform rabbi, I care deeply about the democratic process in Israel, but I also have core values that I hold dear, and religious pluralism is one of them. And we're asking the Israeli government to fulfill its age-old obligations as leaders within the Jewish people to affirm religious pluralism and make sure that our voice is heard in a meaningful way.
Okay, Rabbi Stanton, Eli Hochenberg, I want you to respond to that. We heard now what is right is different from what is expedient. What are Netanyahu's options here if he wants to make a value-based gesture to American Jewry despite opposition within his own government?
Well, there's also an issue of policy or politics and the issue of identity and commitment. When we're talking about policies, the government's policies are often contested by many, including the diaspora Jews. But there is a very basic, substantial commitment that, of course, any leader of the Jewish state must maintain. And this is what Netanyahu is trying to do. But what can we do? There's currently a Republican administration very friendly towards Israel. And Netanyahu is not hiding the fact. The main risk here is to lose the faith or trust of the Democrat Jews. And this is something that, of course, not only Netanyahu, but many others in the Israeli administration are trying to balance and walk in between.
that drops.
I want to bring in Rabbi Stanton very briefly. Rabbi Stanton, President Rivlin said that diaspora Jews' support cannot be taken for granted. How could things change if diaspora Jews decide the Israeli government just isn't listening to them? Very briefly, please, if you could.
It's a very painful idea altogether, and that's the reason that we are requesting with such fervor real and meaningful dialogue and real and meaningful change to give us full and equal access to holy sites and also to affirm our tradition as one of the legitimate streams of Judaism.
Okay, Rabbi Stanton from East End Temple in New York, thank you very much for joining us. Eli Hochenberg, diplomatic correspondent, shedding some light on political stories here. We're going to take a very short break, but when we come back, coming up, Russia Today America, Russia's state-funded news station, is forced to register in the United States as a foreign agent. And we go to the Big Apple, where we take a look at Manhattan's only inner-city vineyard. We're taking a short break. You're watching Perspectives. Don't go away.
Every stone, every street, every scar tells the story of Israel. A place that speaks of the souls of Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. Changed by time and conflicted, its magic still echoes in the hearts of its people. Join I-24 News' Jordana Miller on a journey through history. Watch Holy Land Uncovered every Sunday at 10:05 a.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Fearless, timely, and always engaging. Every night, David Schuster brings the news from around the world to your front door. Watch Stateside, weeknights at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News. News 24 is a Spanish-language weekly news magazine on I-24 News, presented by respected journalists Carlos Gurovich and Damian Pachter, bringing you news and analysis of the most important issues of the Middle East and Israel, with the added perspective of the impact on the Spanish-speaking world. News 24, Fridays only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to Perspectives. I'm Eylon Levy. Over the summer, Moscow and Washington engaged in a tit-for-tat, slashing each other's diplomatic staff numbers in Russia and the US. Now, another retaliation could be on the cards after the US Justice Department required the production company behind Russia Today America to register as a foreign agent. A senior American official said Americans had the right to know that Russia Today was trying to influence the government or public on Russia's behalf. Now, Russian lawmakers are considering responding in kind. Here's Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
Speaking about RT America, we had to register the channel as a foreign agent, according to the demands of the Ministry of Justice. We have heard that Russia will take the mirror measures. How strict would these measures be?
Well, if there are mirror measures, then they will be adequate measures. There are a lot of synonyms, but President Putin already claimed the measures would be quick and mirroring, so we need to be patient for some time.
Joining us now in the studio is our senior international affairs correspondent, Owen Alterman. Owen, thanks for joining us. Let's start with the basics. What is a foreign agent?
Well, Eylon, a foreign agent is anyone under U.S. law under the Foreign Agents Registration Act who reports to a foreign principal. And what would that be?
The non-legalistic answer.
Exactly. The non-legalistic answer is any arm of a foreign government. If you are an agent of that government, interesting that the word agent not defined in the law itself, so it is the general meaning of what an agent is under law, then you are included in this law. we should say other media organizations have in the past registered, including the CBC, the Canadian broadcaster, NHK, the Japanese broadcaster, and a number of media outlets in China. What does it mean? You have to register, fill out a form, talk about who your owner is, maybe about how you get your money and who you get it from, and also submit some of your materials to an office and potentially even put a disclaimer on your website.
So we're not talking about any restrictions just yet on their right to broadcast, just they have to register. I mean, what are the practical implications?
Well, no restrictions for sure on their broadcast. That would be a violation of the First Amendment in the United States. But that is the important point. This registration, this designation, doesn't change what RT is allowed to do. They can have the same broadcast, the same information on their websites. So the question is, what does this really do to help the United States in what it sees as a war against disinformation?
So let's focus on that war on disinformation, or a desinformacja, as we might call it in the Russian case. Despite President Trump saying that he believes Vladimir Putin when he looks him in the eyes and says that Russia didn't interfere in America's elections. That is the assessment of all the American intelligence agencies. Despite that, we're seeing both this, the FBI investigation into Russian interference. Is there a sense that the great American ship of state has really turned around towards confronting the problem of Russian disinformatia and intervention?
Psychologically, yes, Eylon, but the question is, what do you do about it? And I think that this designation shows that the Americans still don't have a strategy about what to do. They're taking a step that's an easy one to take under law, but as we were talking about before, it doesn't have a practical impact. So again, the question is, what does this really do? Again, the West's still searching for a strategy.
Okay, Owen, and I understand this isn't just a problem in America, is it, briefly?
No, there are other countries, of course, dealing with it. We heard Theresa May last night give a speech, her annual foreign policy speech, and when she took on this issue, a unit of the European Union, arguing that Russian influence and disinformation had played a role in the Catalonia referendum. So again, many, many countries throughout the West struggling with this issue. In Italy, by the way, a pilot project to teach kids in high schools how to weed out fake news.
Interesting. So a sense that Russia really, not just in the United States, but around the world in democratic countries, is really trying to pick on those cleavages and sow division within those countries. Very interesting. Owen Alterman, Senior International Affairs Correspondent, thank you very much. In New York, many panned Larry David for making Holocaust jokes on Saturday Night Live. But in Germany, a group of German, Jewish and Israeli artists are rebelling against what the mainstream considers acceptable art and comedy. Polina Garayev has more.
Radical Jews took over Berlin's Gorky Theatre, reads the writing at the bottom of the screen. A correspondent of the fictitious network Jews News Today reports on the emergency. Jewish artists rebelled against the German discourse on what it means to be Jewish. They organized an alternative festival, Radical Jewish Culture Days.
We're actually interested in exploring the root of Jewish identity in Germany right now. Once you touch the root, obviously things start to shake, right? So also what we do is, by asking for the roots of Jewish identity today here, we also shake things up.
The 10-day-long event that concluded on Sunday featured over 35 German and Israeli actors, writers, musicians, dancers, and other performers, whose work represents the diversity of modern Jewishness. The festival was born as a critical response to the Jewish Culture Days organized by Jewish communities in Germany, which reflect a more narrow interpretation of Jewish art, says organizers. The Radical Jewish Culture Festival also doesn't shy away from mixing art and politics and doesn't even view Holocaust humor as a taboo.
If you talk about Jews and Holocaust and I don't know what, you have to take them too. So it's reality. So it's also a point of view. There are people who think like that make these jokes and they think they are funny. So we should talk about this too.
Organizers also wish to expand the debate beyond the Holocaust and do so by including the point of view of Israeli artists.
In Germany, as a Jew, you have the Shoah, you have Israel, you have anti-Semitism. And everybody would ask you, which we also point out in one of the performances tonight, so how do you feel as a Jew in Germany? And hey, I'm so sorry about what happened, etc., etc., etc. You have all this kind of like not really willingly funny situations where you're being trapped. You're like with your back on the wall of being like the victim of a Shoah. We all play a role, and there's a specific role for Israelis in Germany. I would say that Israelis we invited to be part of it are not playing this role.
What we find with those different positions is resources, narrative resources, positions that help us to find and define different ideas and concepts of what being Jewish means as an attitude. Not only being a victim, but also taking it beyond that. Being powerful, being revengeful, being guilty maybe even, which is something that in Germany wouldn't be connected to Judaism at all, but for the Israeli artists who come from Israel is a very present topic.
This play on identities remains a spectacle, a game, admit the curators. But at least in this space, they are the ones making the rules.
And that's it for this part of the show. We're going on a very short break, but coming up, we go to the Big Apple, where we take a look at Manhattan's only inner city vineyard, a tradition brought across the seas from Jews who don't come from Europe. Unusual in Manhattan, perhaps. We're going to take a look after the break. Don't go away.
Step inside a world of high-tech and intrigue, starting from the heart of the Middle East to wherever news is happening. We'll show the untold stories of security, intelligence, and strategic affairs, along with in-depth analysis of global conflicts, military technology, and cybersecurity. All this and more on Strictly Security. Join us on Saturdays, only on I-24 News.
Strictly Security, Saturday at 8 p.m.
Unflinching, opinionated. Weeknights, David Schuster and Shayna Estulin bring you analysis, interviews, and opinions that connect us to the Middle East and the world. Watch Crossroads weeknights starting at 6 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
And welcome back to Perspectives. New York is home to a large Jewish community, which you might associate with lox bagels or salt beef sandwiches. But that's a culture brought over by Jews who reached America from the shores of Europe. So what about the heritage of Jews who reached America from Iraq? Tal Heinrich brings us the only vineyard in Manhattan.
We are the only winery that grows its own grapes.
Welcome to Chateau Latif, the only vineyard located in the heart of Manhattan. It is run by 90-year-old Latif Gigi. He grows his own grapes on the island. Latif turned his 4-story house in the Upper East into a winery, producing dozens of white wine bottles each year.
It grew along the wall and kept climbing, and came to the roof.
Latif is a professor of engineering who taught at various universities, including NYU. His passion for wine goes back to his homeland, Iraq.
My father used to make wine. We did have a vine in the house, but it didn't really bear grapes. But he did make wine. This picture was taken in 1922 in Basra. It shows my parents and 2 of my siblings.
Latif's family was a part of a big Jewish community in Iraq. Up until the early 40s, around 150,000 Iraqi Jews played active roles in many aspects of the country's life. As Latif recalls, being a Jew in Iraq during his childhood years was just normal.
When we go to Baghdad, we have Muslim friends. My father always used to send gifts, normally dates, from Basra. So there were no problems. Don't forget that that period, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, followed the Ottoman rule in Iraq. And the Ottomans, the Turks, really let people have their own groups and their own schools and religious institutions.
But that all started to change around June of 1941, when the Farhud pogroms erupted. In the capital, Baghdad, hundreds of Jews were murdered. In Basra, many Jewish homes and businesses looted and burned down. Jewish families started to leave Iraq.
And it was a very delicate time because I was in Baghdad. while I was trying to gather my papers and get all the permits to be valid to leave, there were demonstrations in the streets, down with Israel, down with the Jews, down with Zionism. So it was a very tricky time for me, whether I was going to make it or not.
Latif immigrated to the United States in 1947, the year of the UN's partition plan that recommended the creation of independent Arab and Jewish states. When the State of Israel was established in 1948, Latif knew that life in Iraq was surely over.
I came to the United States, it was December 10th, 1947. America was at its peak of power. It was the place to be. It was the dream of everyone. Certainly it was my dream. And I landed in New York. I thought that this is just an unbelievable development for me. Walking on the streets, it wasn't like walking on any streets. I am in America.
Latif's new life in America with his wife Vera and their 4 children was thriving, just like his vineyard.
Wine has to be stored at an optimum temperature of 62 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the juice from last September. It's not ready to drink it as wine, but another 4 or 5 months it will be.
Do you sell it?
We don't sell it. We give it away.
The label Chateau Latif is a play on the well-known international wine brand Rothschild Chateau Lafite. Each year, Latif's family and friends get together to paint the labels and enjoy a good meal with some great wine. Tal Heinrich, I-24 News.
Let's go live now to New York, where the Crossroads team is in final preparations for tonight's show. We're joined by host David Schuster. David, what is in store for us tonight?
Well, Eylon, Shana, Stuhlin, and I on Crossroads, we're going to have a pretty good look at the testimony on Capitol Hill in Washington this day from President Trump's Attorney General Jeff Sessions. He changed his testimony yet again about what he knew about possible contacts between the Trump campaign and Russians, but he insists that he has never lied. So that's creating a big controversy. We will also look at the president's trip from Asia back to the United States. It's a success or a failure depending on who you believe, whether you believe President Trump or everybody else. All that's coming up on Crossroads at 6 p.m. Eastern Time.
Taking stock of President Trump's 5-nation tour to Asia, David Schuster, host of Crossroads, thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of today's show of Perspectives. Whether you're going to bed or just waking up, we hope you've gained a fresh perspective on the news making headlines around the world. We leave you with these images, rare images now, of Bornean clouded leopards prowling through the forests of Malaysia. There are only 700 of them left in the wild, encased in an area that is shrinking by more than 1/10 every year, owing to poaching and deforestation. I'm Eylon Levy. We'll be back same time, same place tomorrow. You're watching Perspectives.